This is the moment the world was warned about for years, and now it may already be unfolding in real time. A sudden and rapidly escalating confrontation is spreading across the Middle East. And what makes it more alarming is not just the scale, but the method. Instead of a single battlefield or a clear declaration of war, what we are seeing is something far more fragmented, more unpredictable, and harder to contain. Within hours, events began moving in multiple directions at once, pulling different regions into the same growing crisis. What started as a strategic military move has now triggered a chain reaction that could reshape global security. At the center of this escalation is a reported large-scale naval operation led by the United States. This was not described as a routine deployment. According to early assessments, it functioned more like a maritime blockade, positioned across key international shipping routes in the Middle East. The intention appears to be pressure-based rather than direct confrontation, focusing on restricting movement tied to military logistics and energy transport. These waterways are among the most critical in the world, and any disruption here immediately carries global consequences. With advanced warships, surveillance systems, and missile defense units reportedly in place, the message was clear. Control the flow. Control the pressure. But the response that followed did not come after days or weeks of buildup. It came within hours. Multiple incidents began appearing across different countries almost simultaneously, suggesting coordination rather than coincidence. In Iraq, armed groups carried out sudden strikes near areas associated with foreign military presence. These were not isolated explosions, but part of a wider pattern of pressure aimed at destabilizing and testing defensive positions. In Syria, similar activity was reported near strategic zones, where unexpected blasts and military movement created confusion around key infrastructure points. In Lebanon, the situation grew more tense along the southern border. While there was no confirmed large-scale engagement, the movement of armed factions and increased readiness levels suggested that conditions were shifting quickly. Observers on the ground noted that even without full confrontation, the environment was becoming more unstable by the hour. At the same time, in Yemen, drone activity increased significantly. These systems were used in attempted strikes on infrastructure targets, forcing defensive responses and highlighting how modern conflict has shifted toward remote, low-cost, high-impact technology that can be deployed quickly and repeatedly. Even more sensitive developments were reported in the Persian Gulf. Unverified but widely discussed reports pointed to increased naval movement involving small, fast vessels, often associated with asymmetric maritime tactics. These types of operations are designed not to match strength directly, but to disrupt larger, more powerful forces through speed, unpredictability, and scale. At the same time, warnings were issued to commercial shipping operators, advising caution as the situation became increasingly unstable. When viewed together, these events form a pattern that goes beyond isolated conflict zones. Instead, they suggest a shift into a multi-regional pressure campaign unfolding at once. Rather than engaging in a direct confrontation with a single opponent, what is emerging is a distributed form of conflict where multiple locations become active simultaneously. This changes the nature of escalation entirely because it forces response systems to stretch across different regions at the same time. What makes this development particularly serious is not only what is happening, but how quickly it is happening. There was no long phase of gradual escalation. The situation shifted from tension to active conflict indicators in a matter of hours. Governments have not formally declared war, but the scale and synchronization of events suggest that the situation has already moved beyond a traditional standoff. As more reports continue to emerge, the picture becomes increasingly complex. Military forces across the region are now operating under high alert, and diplomatic channels are urgently trying to interpret what comes next. But beneath all of this uncertainty, one reality is becoming clearer. This is no longer a contained regional issue. It is evolving into something much larger, with consequences that are still unfolding in real time. To understand what is truly driving this escalation, it is important to look beyond the surface events and examine the strategic logic behind them. At the core of the situation is a high-pressure maritime operation, reportedly led by the United States, aimed at restricting access to critical shipping routes. These routes are not just regional corridors. They are essential arteries for global energy and trade. Any disruption here immediately creates international impact, which is why such a move carries enormous strategic weight. This operation is not about occupying territory or launching direct strikes. Instead, it focuses on control through limitation. By positioning naval assets across key maritime choke points, the objective is to limit movement tied to military logistics, oil transport, and supply chains. These choke points act as narrow gateways through which a significant portion of global energy flows, making them extremely sensitive in any geopolitical crisis. The presence of advanced naval units, surveillance systems, and defensive missile capabilities suggests a posture designed to enforce pressure while avoiding immediate large-scale war. However, what followed in response indicates a very different strategic approach from the opposing side. Instead of engaging directly with superior naval forces, the reaction appears to rely on a decentralized network of influence spread across multiple countries. This is where the concept of asymmetric warfare becomes central. Rather than matching strength with strength, the strategy focuses on spreading pressure across several regions at once, making it difficult for any single military force to respond effectively in a unified way. In Iraq, this is reflected through localized armed activity aimed at foreign military positions. These actions are not necessarily designed to achieve territorial control, but to maintain constant pressure and operational disruption. Small-scale strikes, sudden attacks, and repeated engagements force defensive forces to remain on alert, consuming resources and attention over time. In Syria, the focus shifts toward strategic disruption. Infrastructure points, supply routes, and logistical hubs become the primary targets. By affecting movement and coordination, even limited actions can create broader operational delays that ripple through larger military systems. This type of pressure does not rely on large battles, but on continuous interference. In Lebanon, the situation becomes more sensitive due to the presence of heavily armed groups with significant capabilities. Even minor escalation here carries the risk of rapid expansion as the balance of power in the region is already fragile. This creates a scenario where uncertainty itself becomes part of the strategy, as opposing forces must prepare for multiple possible outcomes at once. Yemen introduces another dimension entirely through the use of drone technology. These systems are relatively inexpensive but highly effective in creating disruption. Their ability to bypass traditional defense systems in some cases allows for repeated attempts at targeting infrastructure, increasing both physical damage and psychological pressure over time. Meanwhile, activity in the Persian Gulf reflects maritime asymmetry. Small, fast-moving vessels, combined with potential use of naval mines or swarm tactics, create uncertainty for larger naval forces. Even without direct confrontation, the mere possibility of disruption forces constant caution and slows down normal maritime operations. What ties all these elements together is coordination. The timing and distribution of these actions suggest a broader framework rather than isolated incidents. Instead of a single battlefield, there are multiple active zones. Instead of a single response point, there are many. This creates a situation where pressure is not concentrated but spread, making it significantly harder to neutralize quickly. This is why analysts describe the situation as a shift into modern multi-domain conflict. It is not defined by one front or one method, but by simultaneous activity across land, sea, air, and technological systems. And as these fronts continue to evolve, the complexity of response increases, raising the risk of miscalculation at every step. As the situation continued unfolding, the scale of coordination became impossible to ignore. What initially appeared as scattered regional incidents was now being interpreted by analysts as part of a wider operational pattern. Each development, whether in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, or the Persian Gulf, seem to connect back into a single emerging framework of pressure. Instead of one front expanding outward, multiple fronts were activating at the same time, creating a level of complexity that traditional military planning struggles to contain. In Iraq, the situation remained unstable as armed groups continued conducting targeted operations near foreign military positions. These actions were not large-scale battles, but repeated and calculated disruptions. The intent appeared to be maintaining constant pressure rather than achieving immediate territorial gains. Small rocket strikes, roadside attacks, and sudden engagements forced defensive units into a continuous state of readiness. This kind of sustained pressure does not rely on victory in the traditional sense, but on exhaustion, forcing opponents to respond repeatedly across different locations. At the same time, Syria continued to emerge as a critical logistical pressure point. Reports indicated ongoing activity near key supply routes and strategic military positions. These routes are essential for movement of personnel and equipment, and even limited interference creates delays that extend far beyond the immediate area of impact. When supply chains are disrupted in one region, the effects ripple outward, affecting coordination in other operational zones. This is why Syria has become such a strategically sensitive environment in the broader picture. Lebanon, meanwhile, remained one of the most unpredictable areas in the entire escalation. The presence of heavily armed groups with significant missile capability creates a situation where even a minor incident could escalate quickly. Unlike other regions where activity is more contained, Lebanon carries the potential for rapid expansion of conflict due to its proximity, political complexity, and existing tensions. Military movements reported along the southern border indicated that both caution and readiness were increasing, but the risk of escalation remained high. In environments like this, stability can shift in minutes rather than days. In Yemen, the pattern of drone activity continued to intensify. These systems have become a defining feature of modern asymmetric warfare due to their accessibility and effectiveness. Unlike traditional aircraft or missile systems, drones can be deployed quickly, modified easily, and used repeatedly with relatively low cost. Reports suggested attempts to strike infrastructure targets, which triggered defensive responses. Even when such attempts are intercepted, the psychological and operational pressure remains significant, as defenders must remain alert to repeated and unpredictable threats. What is particularly important in Yemen's role is not just the physical impact of drone activity, but its strategic effect on attention and resources. Every intercepted drone, every alert triggered, and every defensive response adds strain to military systems already stretched across multiple regions. This creates a cumulative effect where even unsuccessful attacks still contribute to overall pressure. In the Persian Gulf, developments remained especially sensitive due to the global importance of the region. Increased movement of small naval vessels raised concerns among commercial shipping operators and defense observers alike. These fast-moving craft are often associated with asymmetric naval tactics designed to challenge larger fleets indirectly. Rather than engaging in direct confrontation, the focus is on unpredictability and disruption. Even the perception of risk in these waters is enough to influence global shipping behavior, insurance costs, and energy transport logistics. Alongside this, maritime security alerts reportedly advised caution for vessels operating in the region. While not all reports could be independently confirmed, the accumulation of warnings contributed to an atmosphere of uncertainty. In strategic terms, uncertainty itself becomes a tool because it forces opposing forces to slow operations, increase surveillance, and allocate more resources to protection rather than movement. When these developments are viewed together, a clearer strategic pattern begins to emerge. This is not a series of disconnected regional conflicts. It is a synchronized network of pressure points operating across different environments. Each region serves a specific tactical function, but together they form a broader structure designed to stretch response systems across multiple domains simultaneously. This is where the concept of multi-front warfare becomes central to understanding the situation. Instead of focusing on a single decisive battlefield, the strategy distributes activity across several locations. This forces opposing forces to divide attention, intelligence, resources, and defensive capabilities. No single command structure can focus entirely on one threat without leaving another exposed. The result is a constant balancing act under high pressure conditions. Another key factor is speed. The rapid activation of these fronts suggests that much of the operational framework was already in place before visible escalation began. Communication networks, logistical coordination, and strategic planning appear to have been prepared in advance. This means that what we are witnessing is not improvisation, but activation. Once triggered, the system unfolds quickly and simultaneously across multiple zones. This level of preparedness changes the nature of escalation entirely. In traditional conflicts, escalation is gradual, allowing time for adjustment and negotiation. In this case, the transition from tension to active multi-regional engagement happened within hours. That speed reduces the opportunity for de-escalation and increases the risk of misinterpretation between actions and intentions. Military analysts observing the situation have pointed out that such environments are highly unstable, not only because of the actions themselves, but because of how quickly those actions interact. A single strike in one region can influence decisions in another, creating a chain reaction effect that is difficult to predict or control. This interconnectedness means that even limited engagements can have disproportionate consequences. As the day progressed, diplomatic efforts began intensifying behind the scenes. Governments and international organizations attempted to assess the scope of coordination behind these events. Emergency consultations were reportedly held, focusing on preventing further expansion of conflict zones. However, diplomatic response often moves at a slower pace than military action, especially when multiple regions are involved simultaneously. At the same time, economic indicators began reflecting growing concern. Energy markets reacted quickly to uncertainty surrounding key shipping routes, and fluctuations in pricing suggested that traders were anticipating potential disruptions. When strategic waterways become unstable, even temporarily, global markets respond almost immediately due to their dependence on uninterrupted flow of resources. Public attention also intensified as information spread rapidly across digital platforms. Videos, reports, and claims circulated widely, often without verification, contributing to confusion about the exact scope of events. In modern conflicts, information itself becomes part of the battlefield, shaping perception as much as physical actions shape reality. What is becoming increasingly clear is that this situation is no longer defined by isolated incidents or regional tension. It is now a connected and evolving system of pressure points, each influencing the other in real time. And as this system continues to operate, the margin for error grows smaller, while the potential consequences expand far beyond any single region involved. As the situation expanded across multiple regions, the focus of global attention began shifting from individual incidents to the overall structure of the conflict itself. What is becoming clear is that this is not a traditional escalation where two sides gradually move toward direct confrontation. Instead, it is a layered and distributed form of pressure that is unfolding simultaneously in different environments, each one reinforcing the other in ways that are difficult to isolate or control. In Iraq, the pattern of continued pressure remained consistent. Armed groups maintained activity near strategic zones associated with foreign military presence. These operations were not designed to achieve decisive battlefield outcomes, but to ensure constant operational strain. Each small engagement forces a reaction, and each reaction consumes time, resources, and attention. Over time, this creates a condition where even defensive stability becomes difficult to maintain because the system is always reacting rather than controlling the tempo. The situation in Syria continued to reflect a similar logic, but with a stronger focus on logistics and movement. Supply routes, transport corridors, and communication lines became key points of pressure. When these systems are disrupted, even briefly, the effects extend beyond the immediate area. Military coordination depends heavily on timing and predictability. And when those elements are interrupted, entire operational structures begin to slow down. This is why even limited activity in such regions carries strategic weight far beyond its immediate impact. Lebanon remained one of the most sensitive and unpredictable fronts. The presence of well-armed factions with significant capabilities means that the threshold for escalation is extremely low. Even minor incidents have the potential to escalate rapidly due to existing political and military dynamics. What makes this region particularly important in the broader context is not just its firepower, but its proximity to other critical areas. Any shift here has the potential to influence neighboring zones almost immediately. At the same time, Yemen continued to represent a different dimension of conflict altogether. Drone activity remained a key feature, reflecting the growing role of unmanned systems in modern warfare. These tools allow for flexible, repeatable, and low-cost operations that can be launched without large-scale deployment. Even when intercepted, they serve a strategic purpose by forcing continuous alertness and defensive readiness. This constant requirement for response creates a form of pressure that is psychological as much as it is physical. The persistence of drone-based operations also highlights how warfare has evolved. Instead of relying solely on large military formations, modern conflicts increasingly depend on distributed systems that can operate independently but still contribute to a broader strategic objective. In Yemen's case, this creates a situation where even limited actions can have disproportionate effects on regional stability and defensive planning. In the Persian Gulf, developments continue to raise concerns about maritime stability. Increased movement of small naval vessels and reports of unusual activity near key shipping routes contributed to a growing sense of uncertainty. This region is one of the most critical in global energy transportation, and even minor disruptions can have significant economic consequences worldwide. The presence of fast-moving, hard-to-track vessels adds another layer of complexity, particularly for larger naval forces that must maintain constant awareness across wide operational areas. The impact of this uncertainty is not limited to military considerations. Commercial shipping companies are also forced to adjust routes, schedules, and security protocols in response to changing risk levels. Insurance costs rise, transit times increase, and logistical planning becomes more complicated. Over time, these adjustments affect global supply chains, demonstrating how regional instability can quickly transform into international economic pressure. What connects all of these developments is not just their timing, but their structure. Each region is contributing a different form of pressure, but together they form a coordinated pattern that stretches across land, sea, and air domains. This is what analysts describe as a multi-domain conflict environment, where no single battlefield exists in isolation. Instead, each front interacts with the others, creating a network of simultaneous pressures that amplify overall instability. This structure makes response significantly more complicated. Traditional military planning is often designed around clearly defined theaters of operation. However, in this case, there are multiple active zones, each with different actors, methods, and levels of intensity. Responding to one area may weaken attention in another, creating a constant trade-off between focus and coverage. Another critical factor is timing. The near simultaneous activation of these fronts suggests that coordination existed well before public escalation became visible. This indicates a level of preparation that goes beyond reactive decision-making. Instead, it reflects a structured framework designed to activate under specific conditions. Once triggered, it unfolds quickly and across multiple regions at once, leaving limited time for gradual response. This speed of activation is one of the most important aspects of the current situation. In conventional conflicts, escalation typically occurs in stages, allowing space for diplomatic intervention or military recalibration. Here, however, multiple pressure points became active within a short time frame, reducing the opportunity for controlled de-escalation. When events move this quickly, the risk of misinterpretation increases significantly. Military and intelligence analysts have also noted that environments like this increase the likelihood of unintended escalation. In systems where multiple actors are operating across different regions, even small actions can be misread as larger strategic moves. A defensive response, in one area may be interpreted as offensive intent in another, creating a chain reaction effect that is difficult to predict or contain. As a result, command structures on all sides are likely operating under heightened uncertainty. Decisions must be made quickly, often with incomplete information, while considering how actions in one region may influence reactions elsewhere. This creates a highly sensitive operational environment where even routine decisions carry strategic weight. At the diplomatic level, efforts are ongoing to understand the full scope of coordination behind these developments. Behind-the-scenes communications are reportedly focused on identifying potential off-ramps that could prevent further expansion. However, diplomacy in such conditions faces a structural challenge. It must operate at a slower pace than the events it is trying to influence. Meanwhile, global markets continue to reflect growing concern. Energy prices remain sensitive to developments in maritime regions, while investors monitor the situation for signs of broader instability. When key transport routes become uncertain, even temporarily, the effects are quickly felt across global economic systems. Public perception is also evolving rapidly as information spreads through multiple channels. Social media platforms amplify both verified reports and unconfirmed claims, creating a complex information environment where clarity becomes difficult to maintain. In this context, perception itself becomes part of the broader dynamic, influencing how governments, markets, and populations interpret unfolding events. What is becoming increasingly evident is that this situation cannot be understood through a single lens. It is not just a military escalation, nor purely a diplomatic crisis, nor solely an economic concern. It is all of these at once, interconnected and evolving in real time. And as this system continues to develop, the level of unpredictability only increases, making the next phase of events even more difficult to anticipate. As the crisis continued unfolding, it became increasingly clear that the situation was no longer developing in a linear direction. Instead, it was expanding across multiple layers at once: military, political, economic, and informational. Each layer was influencing the others, creating a complex environment where decisions in one region could instantly trigger consequences in another. This kind of interconnected escalation is what makes the current moment particularly unstable, because it removes the predictability that normally exists in international conflict. In Iraq, the pressure remains steady, with continued activity reported near foreign military positions. These operations maintained a consistent pattern of disruption rather than escalation into full-scale battles. The objective appeared to be sustained operational stress, forcing defensive forces to remain constantly engaged. Over time, this type of pressure reduces flexibility, as resources must be distributed across multiple potential threat points instead of being concentrated in one area. That alone changes how military planning functions on the ground. Syria continued to serve as a critical logistical environment where even small disruptions carried larger consequences. Transport routes and coordination lines remained vulnerable to interference, and that vulnerability created delays that extended far beyond the immediate locations of impact. In conflicts like this, logistics often become more important than direct confrontation, because the ability to move supplies, personnel, and intelligence determines how effectively any force can respond. When that movement slows, everything else begins to weaken in parallel. Lebanon remained a highly sensitive zone where the risk of escalation was always present in the background. Unlike other regions where activity could be somewhat contained, this front carried the potential for rapid transformation. The presence of well-armed groups, combined with regional proximity to other active zones, meant that any incident could quickly expand beyond its original scope. Even limited engagements in such environments can produce chain reactions that are difficult to control once they begin. Yemen continued to reflect the increasing role of drone-based warfare in modern conflicts. These systems, while relatively simple compared to traditional military platforms, offer significant strategic advantages in flexibility and reach. Their ability to strike quickly and repeatedly without large-scale deployment makes them ideal for sustained pressure campaigns. Even when defensive systems intercept them, the repeated activation of alerts and responses creates continuous strain on military infrastructure. What stands out most in Yemen's role is not just the physical impact of drone activity, but the operational burden it creates. Every interception requires tracking, response, coordination, and resource allocation. Over time, this creates a cycle where defensive systems are constantly active, reducing overall efficiency and increasing fatigue across multiple layers of command. Meanwhile, developments in the Persian Gulf continue to attract global attention due to the region's importance in energy transport. Reports of increased naval movement, particularly involving smaller and faster vessels, contributed to ongoing uncertainty about maritime stability. In such a strategically critical waterway, even minor disruptions can influence global supply chains. The mere possibility of interference is often enough to change shipping behavior as companies adjust routes and timelines to account for potential risk. This uncertainty does not remain confined to military or naval planning. It quickly extends into commercial and economic systems. Shipping insurance costs rise, transit routes are modified, and logistical networks are adjusted to minimize exposure. These changes, while often precautionary, still have real-world consequences that affect global trade efficiency and energy distribution. Taken together, these developments highlight a central feature of the current crisis: distributed pressure. Instead of a single battlefield or defined front line, the situation is being shaped by multiple simultaneous pressure points. Each region contributes a different form of strain, but when combined, they create a broader environment of instability that is difficult to isolate or resolve. This structure is what military analysts often refer to as layered escalation. Rather than a direct confrontation between two clearly defined forces, the conflict unfolds across several domains at once, including land operations, maritime activity, aerial systems, and indirect proxy actions. Each domain operates with its own logic, but all contribute to the overall strategic outcome. One of the most significant challenges in this environment is coordination. When multiple fronts are active at the same time, decision-making becomes more complex and slower, because each action must be evaluated not only for its immediate effect, but also for its potential impact elsewhere. This creates a constant balancing act between offensive pressure and defensive stability. Another key factor is uncertainty. In a multi-front scenario, information is often incomplete or delayed. This increases the risk of misinterpretation, where actions in one region are misunderstood in another. A defensive move might be perceived as preparation for escalation, while a localized incident might be interpreted as part of a broader strategy. These uncertainties add tension to an already unstable environment. As the situation continues, diplomatic efforts are reportedly attempting to identify possible pathways for de-escalation. However, these efforts face significant structural limitations. Diplomatic processes typically rely on time, communication, and gradual negotiation, while the current environment is defined by speed and simultaneous action. This mismatch makes intervention more difficult, especially when events are unfolding faster than responses can be coordinated. At the same time, military forces across multiple regions remain on high alert. Surveillance activity has increased, defensive systems are actively engaged, and intelligence operations are being intensified. Every movement is being monitored more closely than usual, reflecting the high level of uncertainty surrounding the next phase of developments. Economically, the situation continues to influence global markets. Energy prices remain sensitive to any potential disruption in maritime routes, while investors adjust their positions based on perceived risk. Even the possibility of prolonged instability in a key shipping region is enough to create volatility across multiple sectors, from transportation to manufacturing. Public reaction has added another layer of complexity. As information spreads rapidly through digital platforms, narratives form quickly, often before facts are fully confirmed. This creates an environment where perception can shift faster than reality. influencing both political discourse and market behavior. In modern conflicts, information flows are no longer separate from the conflict itself. They are part of it. What is becoming increasingly evident is that this crisis is not defined by a single event or a single decision. It is the result of multiple overlapping systems interacting under pressure. Each system, military, political, economic, and informational, is responding in real time. And each response influences the next. As this cycle continues, the situation becomes more interconnected and therefore more difficult to predict. At this stage, the world is not just observing a regional escalation. It is witnessing a complex, multi-layered system under strain, where every development carries consequences that extend far beyond its immediate origin, and where the next shift could come from almost anywhere at any time.